Welcome to Left on Red, where a Gen X mom and gay millennial do socialism.
We've got left-wing views on news you can use.
And we're going to have like a little bit of a popcorn show today, right? Like no guest, no real agenda, but we already talked about interesting things before we hit record. So we're like, let's just start.
Well, today, the news you can use, the views on the news that you can use is news about our lives.
Right. And like, okay, we are now 2 weeks and some couple days into the Trump administration. And every day is like a fresh nightmare that Stylianos thinks isn't going to happen. But stuff is happening, even if it's not happening, right?
I think, okay, if you've ever seen the meme, nothing ever happens, right? I'm definitely of that tradition. I'm a nothing ever happens bro. But I'm not a nothing ever happens bro because I think nothing happens. There's no events in history. Institutions are so powerful. I'm more of the opinion that so many of us are so focused in on social media and news. And social media and the news are designed in such a way to make you panic and think constantly that the world is constantly exploding and falling down. And I'm just of the opinion that like none of that is actually real, that these algorithms are intentionally trying to make you freak out and feel a lot of fear and chaos. And actually the world moves in a little bit of a slower, more predictable way. Things happen, right? Clearly, the election of Donald Trump was a thing that happened. The genocide in Gaza was a thing that happened. There's aberrations.
Right, and like the executive orders are things that are happening, right? Like
yes, but
the mass deportations, the quotas for ICE agents.
But then again, put that in context. A lot of the executive orders that were so terrifying ended up like being nullified and being taken back. Even some of the deportations are not, the Democrats are like bragging that they were deporting people faster under Joe Biden, which is its own fresh hell.
Right.
But some context is important. Not to say everything's fine, don't worry about it. More just keep a level head, read things, investigate things, think deeply about it. Don't let social media and the news freak you out unnecessarily. But there is absolutely stuff to freak out about, which we've talked about.
What I think is interesting is that outside of government policy is the sort of cultural social effects of Trump 2.0. Like, for example, here in New York City, NYU Langone announced that it would no longer continue gender-affirming care for minors. Evidently, Mount Sinai did the same thing. NYCDSA and other partners mobilized very quickly this past Monday, and you were at that event. And so that's not something that we could say, well, that's because of Trump. And you could maybe say it was because of Trump because these are research and teaching hospitals that do receive federal funding, but they didn't say we're doing it because of threat of funding being cut. Like this was largely, right?
Well, they might have said that.
Did they say that? It's like
I don't know. I
think it's a preventative move, right? Because what we're seeing is that people who work at like the CIA or people in federal agencies who had gone to like anti-racist trainings are being punished. So I think that there's a real fear that institutions that don't preemptively do these things are going to get punished, but we don't know that for sure yet.
Last week when the OMB memo came out, my job freaked out because we're all Medicaid, and they said, yeah, we got to take down the DEI stuff on the website, which maybe I shouldn't say that, but it happened.
I think a lot of a lot of places are trying to figure out what to do. And so, but again, we mentioned this before, corporations do not get federal funding. They should not, right? And they're rushing to get rid of their DEI statements as well. There's actually a newspaper article today in the New York Times about how leftists are critical of DEI. I didn't read the whole thing. But, it was a little like, how do I feel about this? I am critical of free trade. But yes. That said, so I'm like of that generation so my generation of people born before the millennial era. So I was born in 1980, the last year of Gen X. Our main left political organizing was anti-globalization, right? So we were critical of the World Trade Organization. We were, my friends were at the Battle of Seattle. I was like a little bit too young. I was still an undergraduate and I wasn't on the West Coast, but that was the big defining moment, right? So how do we create a globalization that's just? But we were against free trade because the U.S. heavily subsidizes their agriculture, and so does the EU. And then we tell other countries that primarily rely on agricultural exports, like, you can't use like tariffs because that's unfair trade, but we can subsidize, our cotton industry to the tune of several billion. But West Africa, free trade, right? So we were against free trade rules that were unfair, not allowing other countries to pursue developmental goals that were allowed under the previous trade administration, which was called the Generalized Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And under that, like a country like South Korea or Taiwan was able to engage in free trade strategically, but also develop their own industries, which is why, I don't know, like chips and semiconductors and ships and all that stuff come from these countries that were previously very poor. And so we were critical of that. And we were critical of like a free trade that was decimating like, industries at home, right? So manufacturing and that kind of thing, that was leading to a race to the bottom. So our free trade was concerned about development and inequality. I don't want to defend free trade. I never thought I would be critical of tariffs, right? But this is global north on global north violence, right? Like,
And it's on literally global north, yes.
right.
But
I mean,
on
Mexico and the U.S., of course, right? Like, I was critical of. I was not critical of NAFTA. I was 14, but I was part of, a world that was like critical of NAFTA for allowing. Okay, so one of the things that like emerged out of my like world is that NAFTA had a social side agreement that allowed for some criticism of labor practices. It was just very weak. And
Well,
so
it was the Trump administration, the first one, that renegotiated NAFTA to the USMCA, which labor was kind of happy about.
right.
And most leftists, I think the USMCA is better than NAFTA.
Right. And like, so we're not like, but we were not anti-free trade because we thought that countries should be able to unilaterally engage in like tariffs for political retaliation negotiation purposes. We were against a free trade system that was being like jammed down the throats of global South countries who didn't have a chance to engage in their own like sovereign development policies. And also one that was like radically displacing a whole group of people who, add a couple decades down the line would become Donald Trump's fiercest supporters, right?
Yeah. And this makes me think of, we do this constantly where we try to remind people that leftists are not just further left liberals. We're not like extremely liberal, but leftism, liberalism, and this right-wing fascism aren't like ends on a single line, but they're three different tracks. And so, yeah, the left didn't love DEI because we correctly saw DEI as a liberal policy to shuffle some of the seats at the top, but ultimately maintain exploitation of workers who are majority non-white, who are oftentimes not men in a lot of these industries. Whereas the right wing, doesn't like DEI because they're racist.
Right. But at the same time,
Right?
I also don't want to see DEI dismantled. I just want there to also be a way that we can say we want representation and diversity and inclusion, but we also want like a radical restructuring of power and resource allocation in our society. I think you can have both. Because DEI includes things like saying political parties should make sure that our leadership is inclusive, right? And that DEI can include like a socialist organization saying that we want more like non-white, non-men to be able to be supported to be in positions of power. And that's one of the things that like I find not problematic, but like who has time in capitalism, right? Like people like me typically don't have a lot of time. My children are fending for themselves right now. One of them is sick and he's eating saltines and drinking Gatorade.
Oh, that's good. You
Yeah.
have a lot of time, though, relative. People like you don't have time, but you and I, we have a good bit of time.
Well, we have more time because we have flexible jobs.
Yes.
But like a lot of moms, especially single moms, like don't have tons of time. And also like, if my children were young, I would have no time. but my children are older, right? And my son helps me do laundry. And yeah, I can work after we're done here. I'm going to work for a couple hours in the evening, which I kind of like to do in a sick way, because that's how I have my time. I can like move everything around like Jenga style. But like, yeah, under capitalism, working people don't have a lot of time. And like with the increasing like economic insecurity that people face, I think that like what capitalism does is that it makes you feel so exhausted that you can't even imagine spending your time doing something besides like surviving. So I have this book that we were talking about. It's called The Dopamine Nation. Under like whatever late stage dystopian capitalism we're under, we're all so bombarded with entertainment and distraction that like we can't even own our own time to use it in the way that we want to. And like the other day I was like waiting online at Trader Joe's and everybody had a phone out and I was like reading a book because I was like like
Okay,
it's like
that is a little like, okay,
all right, but like
excuse me,
no, not to say
Susan.
that I was special, but it was
Yeah,
so
oh,
hard.
I'm reading a
It
book.
was so hard to do that,
Yeah, okay, I hear
right?
you.
It was like really hard to do that, but like
On
before,
Trader Joe's?
yeah, it's like a line that goes around the whole store, right?
How are you reading a book at Trader Joe's?
I was waiting
You
online to get checked out,
and
right?
you just like had this book with you.
No, I had a book, yeah, because I was at the doctor.
Okay,
Yeah,
all
but it's
right.
like it's so hard to not check my phone, to not check Instagram, to not look
Yes.
around, like to focus on something. It was so hard. And like everything about our society is a distraction, a quick fix. Like you are all accessible, right? So Stylianos used to be accessible to me 24 hours a day, group chats, Twitter, like there's no need to not be constantly entertained. And then on top of that, like, you come home from working at night and you are bombarded with advertisements on social media, TV. You just sit and you think that like all I can do is work and consume. Creating the space is like mentally impossible to take time for myself, whether that be something like reading or exercising or organizing. It feels impossible.
Even sometimes doing something like that I enjoy. Like I really love painting my Warhammer models and I have a lot of them to paint.
Minifigs.
And I love playing video games. And sometimes I find myself at home on my phone for hours on end doing absolutely nothing, like vaguely scrolling Reddit or whatever. And it's like 2 hours later and I'm like, oh my God, I could have been doing something I actually like, but I don't even know how to describe it. If I've
Right, but the
been
time just
addicted
slipped
into
by.
something. Yeah, and I'm not
Right, and
even
like
really enjoying it.
scrolling on your phone, you think of it as I'll just do it for a few minutes, a mindless task that'll empty out my brain, it'll de-stress me, but instead it just feeds itself. And that, like you're saying, is related to the news, it's related to the outrage, it's related to like consumerism, and like it's part of the dystopian landscape, and like it's very hard for me not to get sucked in. And it's also like, oh, I have some friends who send me cute things on Instagram, right? Or like, I don't want to miss what's going on in the group chat, but I can always take 5 minutes, like every hour or two, to just be like, what's going on, and like
Yeah.
catch up. And
The
I'm
group
not going to
chat's
miss
going to
out.
be there in 5 hours.
Exactly. And you could have like the fun task of seeing that there's 500 messages for you.
Yes. I love if I sit down and I focus on painting and then it's like 2 hours later and I've gotten a nice unit done and I feel really good. And then I'm like, ooh, what have people been talking about? Sometimes it does get stressful. Here's a thing I think we should be aware of and we should actively fight. Sometimes it can get stressful because I might get work emails outside of work hours or text messages or get tagged in the group chat or have some form of notification where someone is expecting to hear back from me. And I think our generation at least, like anyone under the age of, actually, I don't even know, people 55 still seem to experience this urgency. I think we all feel this urgency that a text message needs to be responded to pretty quickly, or a tag in social media or in a group chat. And it's just not true. You can just read the email tomorrow. You
Right.
can
And if there's
respond
emergencies, people
later.
can call.
Yes, exactly. In order to reduce the urgency of the text message or anything on your phone that makes you feel like you need to check it immediately, you have to respond later, take more time, and you have to expect other people to be late. You cannot expect people to respond instantly because otherwise we're creating this stress response where we just always are worried there's something on the phone that we have to check. And 9 times out of 10, there's not.
Right. And so it all kind of relates to a fear of missing out. And yeah, I think I've seen a lot of people on social media who's like, here's how we're going to survive the next 4 years. And every one of them says, you're going to limit your media consumption, including social media. You're going to go outside. You're going to touch grass. You're going to spend time with other people. You're going to organize, right? But like, we have to detach ourselves from that cycle where you get that quick hit of stimulation, like a boredom buster, that anything would be better. Like, I want to stretch. Like, we've talked about this. Like, we want to do yoga and like be more mobile. And I could easily do a 15-minute like yoga with Adrienne every night instead of just like mindlessly scrolling. But I have to be really intentional. That takes like mental energy. And why would I do that when I could just lay on the couch, right? So it's whether it's, you know, phone banking, text banking, door knocking, or just doing something for yourself, like cooking instead of getting whatever, DoorDash, whatever people do.
Grubhub.
Huh?
I was listing apps, Grubhub.
Oh, Uber Eats. All that stuff is so, it's like the quick fix. None of it is, like, it's good, but none of it's like that good, right?
So you got a book about this.
Yeah, I got the book. I'm going to read it, and then maybe I'll be annoying, like myself reading the book. But the thing is that I'm like, again, making progress on that book. It's the book that everyone's reading right now called It's called The World Turned Upside Down. It's about radical ideas during the English Civil War.
Oh, I thought this was the dopamine book.
No. The dopamine book just came in the mail today.
Oh, okay.
I'm reading like 4 books right now because Stilianos inspired me to continue reading A History of the World, right? Is that what it's called?
The Dawn of Everything.
The Dawn of Everything. Yeah, the Graeber book.
History of the World.
But it's the same thing, okay?
The only words you got right were yeah.
But yeah, so it's tough. It's tough to have a brain. It's tough to want to be more than just a passive consumer and like a dopamine hitter. And like, I see how it's ruining my brain. I see how it's ruining my kids' brain. And it's like, if I ever tell my kids, I'm like, get off your tablets, they're just like, I see you texting Stilianos.
That's funny. Well, okay, if they were texting me on the tablet, then it would be fine. Okay.
Okay.
You should see what Susan's kids are on these tablets. I thought kids that when I was their age, I was like playing computer games and video games, which for some reason I think is like good and better.
Well, better. It's better.
Yeah, and you know what they were? They were better. They required more mental energy and they were more interesting.
Focus.
Yeah, and so I'm like, okay, these kids must be playing interesting games. They're playing the dumbest Roblox games that require no skill or thought whatsoever. You're just like moving a line to a line. Or they're playing mobile games that there was one that was like Punch Man, whatever.
Right. It's all like dumber versions of Candy Crush, right?
Yes. You just draw a line from a stick figure to another stick figure. There's no obstacle. It's just empty space.
Yeah.
And you watch like 45-second ads in between 10 seconds of gameplay. And I was like, oh my God.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they always want to play the Subway Surfer. And I'm like, no. So I'm always like losing my mind. And I'm telling them like, I say things like, I'd much rather you play a Switch game, like a game that I paid for, a game that has like a story. But you know what my kids do? They use their tablets to look up how to win the game. And I'm like, I know that drives you insane, right?
It takes the magic away.
Right.
You're supposed to struggle a little bit. They're allergic
but
to
here's
like,
the thing.
difficulty.
My kids are still not even the classic iPad generation because they didn't get iPads till they were like reading. You know, so like, whereas like younger kids, like kids who were born in like 2019 and the real babies during pandemic types, those kids were like born and they were like handed an iPad as soon as they, they exited the womb. Right. And they have a very different set of like challenges such that I think I told you that the American Pediatric Association has reformed and changed their developmental criteria because kids are on tablets. Wow. So they're no longer expected to be like crawling by 1 year. Like they don't even expect them to crawl at all. And
what do you mean?
It's like they're no longer considered a developmental milestone. Like they're not expected to have like multiple 3 to 4 word sentences by age 2. Like everything is being pushed back because of these tablets.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And this
So
is, by the way, I think it's easier for us to see this in children because it's outside of us, so we don't have to look at ourselves. And we feel this desire to protect and support children. But this same stuff is happening to you and me, right? Like, I can see
right,
the
well, we
phone.
worry about the kids because they don't have a choice.
Exactly. But we have a choice, and the phone is addictive on purpose. The phones
So
are
if I
designed
thought
to, like, ruin
my
your life.
computer was addictive back in like 2003, I thought I had an internet addiction before Google was like a thing, or Google was a thing, but it wasn't nearly a thing. This is sort of another thing too. It's like, I feel bad for the youth. It's not a judgment, but I had a student like send me like a really sad message. She's like, I have to talk to you. And she said, I'm sorry, but the paper I sent you was written by ChatGPT, and
Oh my God.
I need to, I can't, I want to write another one. And I was like, oh, yeah, of course you can write another one. And I didn't even I don't use AI checkers,
Hmm.
but they always have like the same voice. Like, they're
Yeah.
written very generally, that kind of thing. And I don't try to track kids down or whatever. Like, you only have so much energy, but I try to say, okay, you didn't do this part of the assignment. ChatGPT can never do all of my assignment.
What grade did you give her?
Well, the thing is, I gave her an incomplete because I was like, this doesn't match the assignment, is what I
Oh,
told
and
her.
that's why she told you she did it in
Yes.
ChatGPT.
And I was
Yeah.
like, she's like, oh, so she submitted like another paper and also didn't submit the follow the assignment. But the point is that I don't blame a student who is working full time and being told to write a research paper, feeling the crunch of the deadline instead of asking me for an extension, which I give like incompletes if anybody asks, right? That's sort of something that we've adopted as a way to promote like student success. Like, we'd rather they ask for extra time than to use AI software. But like, that wasn't even an option when I was in school, right? I had to write a paper. You either bought it, which that wasn't an option either when I was in school in the
I used to write people's papers for money.
Right. We didn't have that kind of like development, not even technology. We just didn't have like a paper mill yet,
Well, I had to do it on like Craigslist.
Right. So we just again, that wasn't it wasn't developed yet. And then, or you would just straight up plagiarize it. And yeah, those are not options for me. And like, using ChatGPT seems like it's better than both of those options, right? And it's easy, it costs you nothing, and it's like widely available. And like, that is a huge disadvantage to students to have that even available for them, because, why would they go through the effort of trying to learn how to write if they could have this tool available for them? So that stinks. I feel bad. Like, these tools that are supposed to be helpful are also a huge disadvantage, just like the phone is for the child. And some people are like,
Yeah,
oh,
like-
but not the phone, the tablet. The tablet can help teach kids like numbers and shapes. And yeah, there are definitely some educational components to a tablet, but most people, it's like the kids like it so much, their brains are like, they're like little addicts, right? Especially like around age 2. It's very hard to calm down a child who's very upset because you took away their favorite toy. And the path of least resistance. But you're not around this world, but you just look in a stroller. If there's nobody making any noise, it's because the kid has the mom's phone.
Yeah. Well, this is like what you're saying about the college students makes me think that it's not like kids are dumber nowadays. It's not like college students are less capable than we were. It's just that the tools dumb us down. And so exactly what you just described, if you're a parent, even if you know all of these terrible things about what tablets can do to your child's development, it is extremely tempting to give your child the tablet, because it is like, you might be in a public setting, in like a doctor's office, in a waiting room, and your child might be screaming and throwing a tantrum. And it is such an easy way to help your child calm
Right.
down.
Or like, I remember the first time I was like, okay, tablet time was like, we were like flying on a plane. And it's like, your kid makes noise and people want to kill you, right? If your child is making noise on the plane. And sometimes I would ignore it because I'm like, oh, this is like a 2-year-old child and I'm traveling solo, and they can just like deal with it because they get to go home to their quiet lives, and I get to go home to this 2-year-old screaming at me, and I'm pregnant, right? And so I was just like, sometimes I was just like, I don't care. But other times it was just kind of like, oh, I am that person.
Yeah.
And I never didn't put my kids in public. Like, I was one of those people who's just like, my kids are going to public. And I worked so hard to give them all the little books and toys. And I had like a Mary Poppins sized bag full of distractions, and yeah, they didn't get their first tablets until like they were much older and they were really stupid and ugly, so they didn't like it. It was like a Fire tablet. But if someone told me you're going to be spending $500 per kid on an iPad when I was, before I had a baby, because before you have a baby, you're a perfect parent. That's like,
Yeah.
you know exactly what children need, and all the parents out there are idiots, right? Yeah. But iPads weren't as widely available. Now they're just widely available. And like, I didn't even have a smartphone that was very good. Even when I was like pregnant, my smartphone was pretty bad and it was pretty slow and it was pretty stupid. And now they're just so responsive. And yeah, like all this stuff is out there and it serves great tools, but like, it's like you wouldn't give like a 4-year-old unfettered access to like a room full of candy. But that's what capitalism has done to all of us. It's given me unfettered access to a room full of brain candy. I'm not getting my brain macros. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and in some cases, it almost makes it mandatory, right? Like we can say these technologies are hurting our development and they're addictive and they're difficult for us and making it so that our students aren't learning, our kids aren't developing. But also, if every other student has access to ChatGPT and it makes it so easy for them to crank out a paper really fast and then they have their free time, you're now living in this competitive environment where if you're not using these tools, you might be backsliding and might not be backsliding in an important way like brain development and learning. But if all of your friends are hanging out because they finished their essay in a minute and you're still there writing it, yeah, that social component is important. You might be very tempted to use the AI tool. The same thing happens with like social media. If all of your friends know the news 24/7 because they're on Twitter the whole time, and Twitter, like, that is, I think, the thing I'm most worried about losing out on if I get off Twitter is the news.
Is it the news and not just like the discourse?
Yeah, well, the discourse a little bit, but it's really the news. I feel like I know everything that's happening because I'm on Twitter a lot. And the problem is with that, one, there's other ways to learn about what's happening. And two, I'm learning about everything. And I don't actually need to know everything because 90% of that stuff is a headline that doesn't actually end up going anywhere in reality, right? So these tools existing are designed to addict you, are designed to put you in competition with other people, even if it's just social. And it's very, very, very difficult for us not to use it. Same with kids. Like, yeah, you might know that the tablets aren't good for the kids, but by God, if you need an hour to yourself and the tablet is the easiest way to do that.
Oh yeah,
it's
I should
really,
say zero judgment from me, by the way. I don't want to act like I'm a better mom than anyone because I 100% am not. And like, still Giannis has come over and watched my child like just brain rot away. So like, I'm very flawed and very modern. The only thing I don't let my kids do is watch YouTube. That's the only thing I don't let them do because I think YouTube is the worst. But
Well, her younger son is obsessed with young Sheldon.
yeah.
I'm going to give it to him. Apparently, it's a good TV show. Apparently, outside of the Sheldon character, all the other characters are like well-rounded.
No, it's
and
actually,
interesting.
people compare it to kind of like Malcolm in the Middle.
Oh, funny.
But like, what if Malcolm was like a genius level, like maybe autistic, and like but like charming in his charmlessness. But it's like they're very working class. They're very
It's very funny
flawed.
that he loves young Sheldon. Young Sheldon is like an internet meme to me. And
He loves
he's
young
like,
Sheldon because, first of all, there's a lot of romance and it involves the single grandma.
Oh.
And like, he loves that the single grandma has all these suitors. He loves it. And he's
Maybe
always
he
telling
is
me,
gay.
he's telling me like, Nima was going out with that professor, but now she's going out with this professor, and now she's going out with the coach of the baseball team.
Wow.
He's like, and then they broke up, and then the older son is always like cavorting with women, and he's like, then she got pregnant and she didn't want to, and I'm like, do you know how that happened? He's like, yeah. So he's like learning about life, like a sophisticated understanding of life, but based out of East Texas in the 90s. And they're all Bible people. And so like I asked him, I was like, so what are your feelings? He goes, I'm kind of jealous of them. And I said, why? So he's like, they have a really nice house. It's big.
Oh, wow.
So he has like urban kid envy.
Well, when I was growing up, you know what TV show I liked to watch, I think around his age? I think my family liked it too. Seventh Heaven. Do you remember that?
I didn't watch it because I'm a little too old for that, but it was probably it was on the WB and it was also Christian.
Yes,
But
yes, it was definitely like doing reruns on the WB, which is
it
why I
wasn't like
saw it.
making fun. It was earnest, right? Whereas like
Oh
I feel
yeah,
like young Sheldon isn't 100% earnest. It's a little winky at the camera,
a
you
little
know?
winky. It's mostly earnest, but it's just ironic enough that people online like can meme about it. But
Right.
I loved Seventh Heaven, and that was literally like this like religious. I didn't even realize how religious it was until like looking back on it. I'm like, oh, I was watching like evangelical propaganda.
I think part of the reason why people like young Sheldon is because so Sheldon's like probably exactly my age. Probably also born in like the late 70s, early 80s. It takes place in the 90s and there's no tech. They have like
Mm.
old school TVs. They call up people on landlines. They don't know, like, they just like one time the sister, they just don't know where she is.
Oh yeah, and you
Like,
can't like call her or figure her
no,
out
they
or
couldn't call.
whatever.
And they're just like, you guys forgot about me. And everyone's just like, oh, yeah, right. And so this just kind of happens all the time. People can't get in touch with each other. I think that that's charming.
Hmm.
He also, like, very early on adopts a modem and it's like a dial-up and it pisses everybody off in the family. So I think that there's like a nostalgia component people like as well. But
Which Hugo is clearly drawn to.
who?
Your son.
Oh, Hugo loves all of it. He thinks it's hilarious. He's like, why wouldn't they just call? And I was like, they don't have cell phones, buddy. All the problems, like most of the problems could have been solved if people had cell phones, you know?
I need to like learn about young Sheldon so I can talk to him about it.
Well, Mima is played by the very beautiful and glamorous Annie Potts, who was, she played, I know that's too old of a reference for you, but she played the cool secretary in Ghostbusters, the original
Oh,
one,
cool.
the non-female Ghostbusters.
Yeah, the not DEI woke busters.
Yeah.
Uh,
So now we've come back full circle to DEI.
yes. Well, one thing I forgot to mention, by the way, we're about to wrap up, but I did. This was an interesting. I had an interesting conversation this morning. So I got breakfast with a friend of Ronit's. Funny like connection, but it's this guy who does. He's a pastor. He's something. He's some Christian
Right.
thing.
He's something that might belong in young Sheldon.
Yeah, but like, modern, whatever. And he does this thing where he's in this organization or this company that does education to these evangelical churches on how to navigate like political and cultural divides in the congregations. And it used to do like education, like he would just teach courses with people, and then it
Hmm.
turned into like hybrid, and now it's like a video, and they're reaching like 500 churches a year, all across the country. He said evangelical, and I didn't really probe further because I don't know all of that stuff, but he was giving me the whole, all the different like the big divisions and the denominations. Anyway, none of that's interesting to you, but he wanted to have a chat because he was interested in learning about how to talk about class with people. He's trying to do this whole, political, social, economic like unit of stuff, and they talk about education and race and all these other things. And now he's like, "Okay, how do I talk about class?" And we had a long and interesting discussion about the many ways in which Americans conceptualize themselves or rather they don't, with class, right?
Hmm.
Too long of a discussion for us to have here. But one thing that he said that was sort of unrelated to our discussion, but kind of he was talking about people in college and a thing that they do, is this really fascinating thing that I want to think about more, which is he said that people like to try on ideologies before they adopt them. I thought that was really interesting. And I
But they
thought
only
at
do it in
first,
college, though.
well, I thought at first it was a college only reference. But
Hmm.
he was saying he thinks people do that all the time, and not just ideologies, but religion and any like similar thing. So people would like to try on a church before they really inherit the identity. And that's what he meant. Like, not just like they want to try on the ideology before they fully agree with it. He means like before it becomes part of their identity, they go through this try on period, which on the one hand explains to me how you have a lot of people kind of radically changing belief system to belief system to belief system. And I used to think these people are just having like a mental break. But when he said that, it makes me think maybe these people are trying on identities before one of them feels right enough for them to fully adopt.
Hmm.
And instead of a natural evolution or whatever else might be at play, they're trying things out before one of them connects strongly enough. And I thought about that with like the liberal to ultra leftist pipeline that people sometimes talk about online, which we can't get into right now. But it was making me think about, how do we, if we want to organize people into socialism or into class consciousness, how do we offer them a way to try on the ideology such that they can then get into adopting it and internalizing it? And
We
part of my
can't
pushback
girl
at the
boss,
time,
gatekeep, and gaslight. First of all, we can't be like, oh, you use the wrong term, that's offensive. We have to be open towards casual entries. But I got to think about that. And if anybody who's listening has ideas and wants to be a guest, because the thing is that the political socialization literature says something very different, which is that most people's politics are pretty cemented by the time they're about 21 to 25.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I
And like the
don't
things
feel
that happen
that's
in your
true.
life between up until then are very significant, which is why like people who like kind of came of age during like the Vietnam War kind of are critical of U.S. imperialism. They might not necessarily be critical of greed, because a lot of those people became like Wall Street guys, eventually, but they're going to be critical of a certain kind of American empire, and they might be critical of war.
Maybe, but I feel like Gen X is one of the like most reliable war supporters in the
Yeah,
United
but
States.
we always have been. Like Gen X thought that came of age when America won the Cold War. So they're like the last generation that believes in like the goodness of American empire.
I guess I associate them with the Vietnam War as well.
Gen X, come on.
I don't know. I don't know what my age is. My generation.
Gen X was born like in 65 and the last year is 80. So no.
Okay, so Vietnam War is still boomers?
Yes.
Those are still like war supporting people.
Yeah,
I don't know.
they are. That's why I got yelled at, on the news by a 72-year-old for like, daring to criticize American empire, because
Well, I guess we're just challenging this idea that those formative years are so cementing or so formative in the first place.
I mean, like, they're formative. I'm not saying that people don't try other things on for size, but like usually, and some people think that they don't come up with any politics at all, and that is formative as well, right? That's why you hear one third, and one third. Right? Like 1/3 people are Democrats, 1/3 people are Republicans, and 1/3 don't have an ideology.
Yeah.
And about half the people just don't even vote. So they're apolitical, and that's also the result of a socialization that happens at a certain point. I think that vast majority of people, they don't have politics because they feel hopeless.
Yes.
And that is way more important than anything else, than any butthurt emails or anything like that. It's like, no. And that's why the number one source of criticism in New York City of, not number one, but a highly cited source of criticism of, like, for example, the congestion pricing is that there was no way that this congestion pricing would actually go to the MTA. A fundamental distrust in government, that it was going to be squandered and like used for personal gain. And like,
I had a friend arguing that to me.
Right.
And I was trying to point out to him, I was like, here's all this evidence, here's all the streams.
Here's the
that just never
laws
happens.
that were passed
the MTA is
to
so
prevent this from
mismanaged. Yeah. The number one response I get talking to anyone about a candidate, about a policy is, you think that's going to happen? Nothing's going to change.
Right.
Fat
But
chance.
hey, guess what? On this show, like in this house, we believe in science. On this show, we believe that cynicism is easier than being hopeful. And like, you have to make the effort to try to be hopeful. And it's easier to be like, nothing good will happen. Everything is useless and hopeless. And what's the point in trying? And that's kind of like scrolling on your phone or, never exercising, right? Like, that's a choice. We're not here to judge, but to say that you can exercise and like do good things for your body. You can get off your phone and you can cultivate the possibility that we can make changes, but you have to like take that first step.
Yeah. We need to make a yard sign or a shirt, in this house.
On this podcast.
Yeah. On this show, we believe in hope. We believe in, I was going to say change, hope and change. Obama popped off, as the kids say, when he made that
but like
slogan.
he did it. It didn't mean anything. It just meant like, it literally just meant hope.
It was good. It was
and the
good.
change meant, like a, Ivy League educated black guy instead of an Ivy League educated white guy.
There we go.
We changed that up. But we didn't change much else.
Yeah,
And
that's the liberal DEI
right, and
at
we want
work.
more than that.
Yes.
Right? So like somebody once said, well, Obama being president did a lot symbolically for Black people, but actually poverty among Black population and homelessness went up, right? And so liberal DEI means that we have more role models, but like not socialist DEI, but whatever. Socialism means that the communities that are like the most marginalized, they need a change to their material conditions in addition to their representation. I do want both.
Yeah.
Like,
We
I have
need
to
to do
say,
a
my last thing I'm going to say, which is DEI problematic, is that I do appreciate seeing people who look like me on social media doing things like wearing makeup or working out in the gym, because I only ever saw like white blonde women as a Gen Xer as symbols of beauty or strength or envy. And of course, that's not true. Beautiful people exist of all races and ethnicities and cultures, and so that's nice, right? That's great, and I hope that my kids will never feel like little freaks for not fitting into some Western cultural ideal of beauty. They can feel like freaks for other reasons, but that's nice. And so, some things we've made progress in, and many things we have not done anything. So, and
yeah.
in this podcast, on the show, we believe in hope.
Yeah, we need to do one of those. I'll find one of them, like science is real, whatever, and I'll do a little design for what
Okay.
our beliefs are. There's also something on TikTok they call Hope Core, which
is that kind of like the opposite of like doom core?
yeah, exactly. So a core is like a term you use for like a
Like a micro
genre of
style,
video.
like
Yeah,
cottage
exactly.
core.
Yes, macro style. That's great. And Hope Core is just like series of videos where things are happy and positive and hopeful. And sometimes they're really funny because they'll take like a video that's like really bad or violent and they'll just cut off the bad or violent parts so it seems weirdly positive, and that's cute and funny. But yeah, we're a Hope Core
Yeah.
podcast.
And we don't revel in our whatever superiority. Because I think I saw someone tweet this. It's like, if you know somebody who voted for Trump or refused to vote at all, and they are coming to realization they made a mistake, the appropriate response is like, not I told you so, but hey, welcome. So hey,
Yeah.
if you did either of those two things and you're like, what the heck? Then we have to say to you, welcome. Welcome to the hashtag not resistance. What are we calling ourselves? The hope core.
The Hope Core podcast. We need to get the socialist DEI Hope Core supporters. I forgot to mention when I was talking about that conversation, and this will wrap us up, that he was talking about people trying on ideologies before they adopt them as identities. And one of the things I said to kind of push back was, well, we don't want people to have socialism as an identity. We want them to have socialism as something that they do, right? Distinguishing politics and political beliefs from identity, and politics and political beliefs as an action that you take, this organizing that you work on, this organization that you're a part of. And that's something I'm hoping folks listening try to think about, which is, how do we identify the ways in which, when we're trying to grow our movement and convince more people of the existence of class and develop their class consciousness and convince more people to be socialists, how do we find a way to have them try that on and adopt it as not even their identity, but their practice? And I'm sure folks have lots of ideas, but feel free to send them in. We are now checking the email somewhat.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, somewhat semi-frequently, and there's a contact form.
But they're emails, so.
Yes, and there's a contact form too that you can use to reach out, which we are also checking now again. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you folks. You guys can also all DM me on Twitter, which is what you do. Susan's upset that you don't DM her.
No, I'm not, because my DMs are closed.
Oh.
So I was like wondering at first, but I was like, oh, right. I'm a woman on the internet, and when I had my DMs open, it was like a lot of abuse. So I was just like,
Yeah.
a lot of like being told that I was ugly and stupid. And I was like, I don't need you to tell me that.
I get those too, but I get more of like, I got a lot of foot fetish guys. And I think
I don't
they
get
made
any
a
of
foot
those.
joke.
So
yeah, I made a foot joke. And
right.
I think they were like, ooh.
how dare you have feet? Yeah.
No, it's positive. They
Stylianus's
love the feet.
That's true. Stylianus's Twitter is more spicy than mine. Mine is very like not spicy, but I do link my work in there.
Yeah.
So
I don't think mine is spicy. I occasionally post like a sexy photo.
right. That's not like a little bit of heat.
Which the gay men of Brazil, who I love,
Gay men
really
of Brazil.
enjoy.
If you'd like to speak to us about resisting Bolsonarism, please join us on Left on Red.
Yes, that's good. Or you
Because
can also,
Trumpism is not something that just occurs in one country. We see it everywhere, which is why if people feel the need to leave, I support it. But I also feel like there's no place that's safe because this nonsense is everywhere because it's a result of capitalist, neoliberal, late stage disaster. And so like inequality, the inequality, diversity, and the rising, instability, right, of post 2008 financial capitalism. No place is immune, right? Not Sweden, not Germany, right? Not the US. I mean, even Canada, we're going to see a right wing sweep, right? So because the liberals were in power, the liberals were in power, and people are pissed, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, apparently in Mexico, they have somehow figured out how to do politics in a way that very few other leftist parties can do. Shout out to AMLO and the true president of the Americas, Claudia Sheinbaum.
right. So please save us, President Sheinbaum. Forget about President Xi. So we know who our saviors are.
Support both of them. But something I hear about what she does that's really cool. We should really wrap up, but apparently she does like multi-hour press conferences, and it was a reminder because I was like, why the hell don't we do that? And then I was like, oh yeah, Joe Biden was like about to fall asleep every time he was in front of a camera. And I remember that we can't do the multi-hour press conferences because our politicians are either like senile or evil and lying
or
all the time.
Stupid. Like,
yes.
Not to be ableist, but like they don't seem to have a clear set of policy priorities and ideological commitments the way that Mexico's president does. So that would require like a vision.
Yeah, to do a multi-hour press conference as a neoliberal Democrat, you're basically telling everyone, I don't really know. I'm just here to enrich billionaires and slightly push back on
in a woke
Republicans.
way.
Yeah, in a woke way.
We want to be a slightly worse version of Donald Trump.
Exactly.
We won't commit to much. We won't commit to like Medicare for all or paid parental leave or a Green New Deal or
slightly better version.
Right. Like a little bit more liberal, acceptable, and like a little more rule of law.
Yeah.
But
But apparently bragging about deporting illegal immigrants at a faster rate.
That's that's the handshake meme, Democrats, Republicans.
Deporting my people who are just trying to who like want to live in the country. I don't understand it. Anyway, we have to wrap this up.
World's longest popcorn episode.
Yeah.
Left on Red.
Thank you all for listening. I hope this was fun and interesting. We did talk about news. We did a good job.
Yeah. And so stay tuned. Let's keep on believing in hope.
Yeah, Hope Core podcast. I'm Scott.
I'm Susan.
And solidarity forever.